Nish, Adini Wishla, Falchester, and I'm sure Lycrock, the present tense, is a definite head wrecker in Yeliga, but it's handy enough if we get the hang of it as quick as. So on Cade Road, probably the first thing we need to realise about Irish is that the vowels are have a bit more to do with words than they do in English. So in Irish, the vowels are split up into two groups: broad, a, o, u, and slender, which are I, e. Okay. Now, the reason this happens is that every word in Irish that is over one syllable, like shop a, Kieran, tabla, Gaelga, Kiva, okay, they always have to match either broad to broad or slender to slender. Okay. Now this means when one syllable finishes, like shop, it's finishing with a broad letter O, so the next one has to start with another broad. It may be O, it may be U, it may be A, but it has to match broad to broad over the syllables. So again, we have Kier finishing with an A, the next one has to be a broad, and it just so happens that it's an A in this sense. Again, two A's matching each other. Okay. Whereas over here, again, it's always the last vowel. So we have a big broad one, then a slender, so this is the last one. It's I. This is slender. So the next one has to start slender. Gaelig. Okay. And again with Kiva, although we have two big broad A and O, we have a slender I here. So that's the one that has to match with the next one coming after it. So Kiv. And again, Jerifer. Okay, Jerifer. Okay, so we see we can have broad and slender beside one another in the same syllable. Okay, as we have here. But once you go to another syllable, the next part of the word, crossing over the consonants, it has to match. Okay, bigger words, of course, like shoppadaracht with 4 syllables. You can see again it still matches. So broad. So the next one has to start broad. Okay, so it's still broad. So the next one has to start broad. This one ends slender, so the next one has to start slender. Okay. Now, the shin jackergle, that's difficult enough because there's no such thing in English, but it's very important to realise when we're talking about the present tense. Okay. Now, the reason being, in the present tense, what we have to do to the verb, the doing words such as go, run, skip, jump, we have to put an ending onto the end of the word. Okay. So we're going to need to know the difference between broad and slender. Okay, so we'll start with the rules. So to put a verb into the present tense, the first thing we should look at is whether it's got 1 or 2 syllables. Okay, so words such as tog, 1 obviously, or brish, or jan, or ich, all 1 syllable. So most of them are 1 syllable. There's only a few you'll come across with 2 syllables. So if the verb has 1 syllable, it's easy. Okay, we just simply have to work out whether it's broad or whether it's slender. Okay. So for example, looking up there, tog, do we think it's broad or slender? It's broad because it ends in the O. Brish, broad or slender, is slender because it ends in our I. Jan, broad or slender, it's broad because it ends in the A. And again, I with the I is slender. Okay, so the only thing we need to do with our 1 syllable ones is make sure that we keep it broad to broad, or in this sense, slender to slender. Okay, so down here we have our different endings. Now the strange thing about it, we have a specific ending that means I. So the word may does not exist in the present tense. Okay, so we have a specific ending that means I, and it's going to end in im, as we say there. And we have a specific ending that means that you use for all of the rest if it's not I. So n and e a n n. Okay, so for example, as I said up here, tog im would mean I lift, and only I lift. Okay, whereas if we wanted to say he lifted she lifts or he lifts, we need to use the other ending, togan, and then put in our she. Togan, she, he lifts. Okay. And again, just with the slender, brish im is I break, and brish in she, for example, is she breaks. Okay. So our top two boxes just tell us which endings to put on, whether we want to say I or whether we want to say somebody else, and again whether the word is broad or slender. Okay, so hopefully everybody's capable of getting the one syllable endings, and I'd be quite happy if everybody got that. But just to move on to the two syllable, which are slightly more difficult. Okay, we've got a wee bit of an introduction here. Okay, but on to the next page. Okay, so we see if the verb is two syllables, it's a wee bit more complicated. So words such as can-e, eerie, and alpi. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is take the second syllable off, because it would be far too long if we put something onto the end of that. So take off our a-I-G-H or our I-G-H. Okay, now once we take the second syllable off, then look to see whether it's broad or slender. So the can is broad. Okay. Ear is slender. Okay. So they're two syllable verbs. So we're in these two bottom boxes with the two syllable verbs. Okay. And again, we just put on the ending for which one we want to say. If we want to say I by, it's can e im. Notice that there's a fada on the I of the two syllable one, but there is no fada in the one syllable, so that's why it sounds different. So can e im, or he buys, or she buys, or my mum buys, can e in she, or she, or moami. Okay. So again, with the slender one, we're just using the slender I fada m instead of the a. So it's ear em, I get up, or eerie in she. Okay. So it's difficult enough, but it's just first and foremost taking off your ending, okay, and then figuring out whether it's broad or slender. So he's broad because he ends with an a. He's slender because it finishes with the I. Okay, so it's either here for broad or here for slender. Okay, jacker, it is difficult, but it hopefully will be grand when we get used to it. So he's and shaw again, just as a reminder of I, you, he, she, we, you, they we can use. And just a couple of strange ones that we'll come across, and again I'll not wreck too many heads explaining how this happens, but just give the example. So immer will change to imrium, imriin too. Okay, so we can see the I, that wee I has disappeared. Oskel, which we know from before, so osklium and osklian too, or she. Again, the a and the I have disappeared. Okay, so tons of other verbs that we'll come across and hopefully get used to using in the next few pages. But like J, that this will help you look through their first few pages and we'll sort something out.